Good cutting enhances the quality of good meat. In his way, the meat cutter is an artist. Poor cutting results in an inferior piece of meat, regardless of quality.
Let's start with an introduction. Could you tell us your name and job title, or how would you describe your job title?
Sure. My name is Chris O'Blennis. I'm from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which is where I currently live now. And just over a year ago, I bought a business called the Jackson Hole Buffalo Meat Company, which, so I guess that makes me the owner, or head debtor, more likely. It's been around for about 70 years. It's a buffalo and elk game meat business. We ship all over the country. We have a butcher shop here or in Jackson Hole proper. And we do wholesale sales to restaurants, and we make jerky, salamis, sausages, all sorts of stuff out of all non-amenable game species.
Not just exclusively bison and elk, or not just bison and elk?
Bison, elk, and wild boar are the three animals that we deal with right now. So they all fit under the non-amenable category. Gotcha. Because my facility is a state-certified meat processing plant, so not slaughter, just processing. But so we are only allowed to do species that fit under the non-amenable category because we are inspected by the Wyoming State Department of Agriculture. So we sort of are in a niche, area that is kind of unique in the meat world. So
yeah,
we don't do any beef or lamb or pork or anything like that. So that stuff is all handled by more traditional butcher shops.
Gotcha. Well, I'd like to get back to your company and talk a lot about the details of that in a moment, in a little bit here. But leading up to your current job and the ownership of this company, I wanted to scroll things back. I remember you telling me, hearing about, Southside Pizza and the restaurant that you first owned. Was that the name of it? And in years ago, and then a journey from ownership of that restaurant, operating that restaurant, to where we ended up meeting at Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture in New York, and everything that transpired there. You were there a lot longer than me. I'd love to reminisce with you for a moment about some of those early years, and then I'd love to hear about what happened after that as we lead up to your purchase of Jackson Hole Buffalo Meat Company.
Well, I guess I'll just start. I've been in the restaurant business for a really long time, since I was like 15 years old, and I had been living all over the West and had eventually made my way back to Jackson Hole around 2003 or 2004. And when I got back there, I had really gotten interested in gardening, of all things. And so through that, I decided that I wanted to learn a little bit more about organic farming. So I went and I started working at a place in Victor, Idaho, which is about 40 minutes away from Jackson Hole over the Teton Range. And they do an all-organic biodynamic vegetable CSA. And they've been in business for, like 18 years now. So I worked with them part-time doing managing their work shares, and I did some of their farmers market stuff for them, just sort of a jack of all trades for about 4 or 5 years while I was still working in the restaurant business, and just went really down the rabbit hole. I got really excited about organic farming, just the whole social movement behind it, the quality of the produce, and my goal was always to open a restaurant. Now, looking back, I realized that was insane. But at the time, it was something I was really interested in, and I really wanted to use what I was learning at the time at Cosmic Apple to drive what we were doing on the restaurant, or what I wanted to do on the restaurant side. So through a series of a few fortuitous circumstances, I happened to meet someone who had put an ad in the paper looking for someone to help them open a restaurant in Jackson. So I met with that person. We had a big, long discussion. I had a business plan. I had a concept set up. I had a large number of people that were willing to come and work with us. So basically, this person put up the money. I put up the ideas, the sweat equity, and the time, and I built a restaurant. So it was called Southside Pizza. It was handmade pizzas, burgers, just your general like bar fare, but it was also as far as I know, the first farm-to-table restaurant in Wyoming. I don't know of any other ones that were around at that time, and we really did, for, being like 2007, 2008, we did some really amazing things as far as the food. Like, we were sourcing organic, hydroponically grown tomatoes in Wyoming. We were sourcing all local beef. We were getting local pepperoni and mushrooms. My dad was coming in every morning and making the pizza dough. Everything was made from scratch. We hand cut the French fries. Our burger buns were from scratch. The food was really, really phenomenal, and we were starting to get some traction in the beginning, but I made the classic mistake of going into business with someone I didn't know well, and that ended up being the death knell of my time in that restaurant. I was working on basically a handshake agreement, and I had put the entire thing together, gotten it open. We were up and running. We were generating revenue. And my partner, who was supposed to remain a silent partner, decided to get fired from her job and decided to instead come in and start paying herself basically off the top of the restaurant. And she began acting as, quote unquote, the manager. And that didn't work well because she had no experience. She didn't really know what she was doing. She had a drinking problem. And it just sort of spiraled downhill from there. And I was a little too idealistic. I thought that, just by working harder and being more dedicated, I could overcome some of those problems. But they were, in the end, insurmountable. And she was basically skimming money off of the restaurant and bouncing checks, not paying our purveyors. In the end, the week before Christmas that year, none of our employees got a paycheck. And that kind of brought everything to a head. And I realized at that moment that I had really screwed myself by not forcing the issue of contracts, legal paperwork. I just had faith that this person was going to meet me halfway with my effort and my integrity, and that was a huge life lesson in trust and being skeptical of things that are too good to be true. So I was, in the end, I won't say forced to walk away, but I forced myself to walk away because I realized that there was no good outcome to what was happening there. And the longer I was involved, the harder it was going to be for me to handle it personally well. And I ended up just having to basically walk away with nothing. And at the time, it was really rough. I was, I'd spent 7 months working, nonstop, literally like demoing the space, refurbishing it, putting the menu together, hiring everyone, sourcing, like I did everything. And then to have to just walk away from that was really hard. Excuse me. But looking back on it now, it's probably one of the best things that's ever happened to me because it wasn't sustainable. The business wasn't going to last despite it being a good opportunity. There was just too many headwinds against it. And by stepping away from that, I kind of put myself out in the open and had nothing to rely on. So that forced me to really think about what I really wanted to do with my life and what my next steps were going to be. So once I extricated myself from the restaurant, it lasted for about another 6 or 8 months and then just imploded. I was at that time working in a specialty grocery store, just helping out a friend who owned it, doing buying for, special items, local items, things like that. And that's when I really became familiar with the products from the Jacksonville Buffalo Company because I was buying their jerky and their salamis for the grocery store. I did that for about 9 months, realized that wasn't what I really wanted to do. And I knew that I needed to get out of Jackson. It's an amazing place, but it's also a very small town. And it's really easy to get trapped in your routines and your normal way of living that doesn't, for me, always end up with me challenging myself and reaching my best self, if you will. So I knew that there was time for me to maybe step out of Jackson for a little bit. And so I started looking for opportunities that would blend my farming experience with my restaurant experience, but also allow me to step into some new things that I hadn't done yet before. And so one of the things I considered doing was going to culinary school. So I looked at the French Culinary Institute, which is now, I think, the International Culinary Center in Manhattan. And in talking with them, I got accepted to the culinary school. And in talking to them, they asked me about, some of my passions and the things I was really interested in. And I brought up my history in farming. And they're like, oh, well, you should do some research on this gentleman named Dan Barber. And, everyone who knows anything about the new food movement now knows who Dan Barber is, but at the time I did not. And so I started doing a little bit of research, and through that learned about the Stone Barn Center, which is where Dan's second restaurant, Blue Hill at Stone Barns, is located. And I did a deep dive into Stone Barns and saw that they had apprenticeships for a whole slew of different things, like market gardening, greenhouse, flowers, but also livestock. And livestock is something I was always really interested in. I was around it a lot as a kid. My grandfather used to raise chickens and turkeys and cattle and that, on a hobby farm when I was really little, but I never had any firsthand experience with it. And so I thought, bing, that's what I want to do. I want to work at this farm, do an apprenticeship, learn about livestock, and then take, while working hand in hand with this world-class restaurant, and then take that and see where it takes me. So I applied for an apprenticeship, sent off all my paperwork, and if I remember correctly, this is the same year that you applied for an apprenticeship and our friend Dan. So I had applied, sent off all my paperwork, didn't hear anything back from them for a little while, and then I got an opportunity to go down the Grand Canyon for a month on a whitewater rafting trip. And I thought I had enough time with the deadline that they'd established that I could get back and still have time to go over anything, do an interview, come out for a work day, whatever. So I just set sail and went down the Grand Canyon, not realizing that 3 days after I left, I got an email from who became our mentor, Craig Haney, saying, your resume looks great, come on out for a work day. He got my email response saying I'm out of touch for the next 29 days. And at that point, he, I think, had already not necessarily settled on you and Dan, but I think he found two really strong candidates and was like, well, I can't really wait for this dude to show back up from the desert, so I think I'm going to go ahead and bring on these two guys. And I got an email saying, we really are sorry that you're not in the running anymore. Your resume looks great. Call us next year. And I came out of the Grand Canyon all dirty with a beard and read that email and was like, what the hell? So I was a little upset about that. And I was like, well, I'm going to show them. They can't stop me. So I just drove out to New York. Yep. And I showed up at the farm one day. And I ended up working with Craig. He saw me. I emailed him or called him a couple days before and was like, I'm coming out there. And I think he was like, oh, shit, what did I do? Who is this dude? And so I showed up, and he and I ended up working like a 13-hour day together that day. He was working by himself. I think, we loaded sheep. It was like, I really think I was actually of a lot of use to him because he was working single-handedly trying to get a lot done. And I think the whole time he was like, oh, man, this guy really was a good candidate, but, what's done is done. Mm-hmm. And, he was like, well, I really am sorry that this isn't going to work out this year, but, we'd love to stay in touch, whatever. And I was like, nah, Craig, I'm going to be coming here every day until you give me an opportunity. And he just kind of looked at me like, okay, sure. Yeah. So I went down to the city. I stayed with a friend. I got a job in a little restaurant called Sorella, which was really pretty incredibly amazing. And I just worked garde-manger, doing salads and stuff for them in this little tiny, really high-end Italian restaurant 5 days a week. And I was living in Chinatown. And every single day that I had a day off, I would catch the train up to Tarrytown and then show up at the farm and volunteer.
Yeah.
So that was the summer that you and I and Dan all worked together. I would kind of pop in here and there whenever I could. And then over the course of the summer, someone left a position there, which opened up a part-time position for me, which I was offered, which then at the end of that season, I remember you and I and Dan all sat down and we all were offered jobs under Craig. Yeah. For a very, very low wage, if I remember correctly, yeah. Which you being, I think, the wisest one out of all of us realized that probably wasn't sustainable, and you went your way, and Dan and I ended up sticking around. Yeah. And Dan and I ended up working there together for 5 years after that, with under Craig, who I must say, Craig is my hero in a lot of ways. He's one of the kindest, smartest, hardest working, most dedicated people I've ever met.
Yeah.
I think that was... Go ahead.
I agree. Craig is an outstanding individual. I really could have benefited from a lot more time with him, which is certainly why you and Dan accepted that position and stayed there. Before, I would love to hear everything that transpired after I left, but for a moment, I want to reminisce about just that time that we did overlap there, because it's wonderful, wonderful memories for me. Yeah,
me too.
I remember you coming up and kind of hearing the pieces of the story, and I remember you working hard and then being like, I got no place to sleep, and then I'm like, come over to my place because I was renting that little room out of that house, and then you were crashing there on the couch, and then you were sleeping in pig huts some nights.
Yep.
And
I had my camping game was tight. Like, I'll just put it out there. They were pig huts that were not occupied by pigs at the time.
Right.
They were just empty pig huts sitting on the lawn. So it's not like I got that cozy with them. But I just kind of did whatever. It was an adventure. I was really enjoying myself, and it was in a whole new world. I'd never been to New York before. And I was gaining a lot of really interesting experience. Even in my time in the restaurant, the people that owned it and run it are still some really good friends of mine. They've started their own farm now. But it was really great for me to spend that time in the city and exist in the city in that way. But also, when the city got to be a little bit too much, I had those days where I was able to go up and be in sort of a more natural environment and physically working hard and learning things every day. And it was, that operation was no joke. Like, we were working really hard, and you guys, especially because you were there every day, but we were raising a lot of animals at one time, like, 1,500 layer hens, 100 pigs, 75 sheep, like a couple thousand chickens a year, 800 turkeys, doing all those geese, like doing all of that and being put into a multi-species system in a rotation like that was so intense in its own way. Like, we were doing a lot of things at once, and I think it was really a trial by fire, and that work really resonated with me. Like, I felt for the first time like, oh, this is what I'm here for. Like, this is why I'm on this earth. Like, I really resonated with doing that work and raising livestock, the day-to-day of it, and then also the bigger picture of it, of, being responsible for these animals and their lives and creating creating food for humans. There's something very profound about that. And over the course of those 6 or 7 years that I was there, it really affected me, like, on a DNA level, I think. And so and also the other part of being at Stone Barns for that time was just the sheer number of amazing people that we got to interact with.
Absolutely.
And it was just a never ending stream of interesting people who were really passionate and motivated and dedicated and wanted to learn. And that being said, it's also a bit of a fairy tale environment. There's no getting around that. It's on this beautiful former estate, and it's really near the city, so you get a lot of looky-loos and a lot of unrealistic expectations. But that was all part and parcel of the job in itself. So, we got to work closely with the public and school kids and doing tours, but it was also a production-level farm. I mean, we were slaughtering 250 chickens a week ourselves in our poultry processing facility, so it was not like a fantasy farm. It just was a working farm that happened to exist in a fantasy environment. And I think in the long run, that's probably what drives most people to leave Stone Barns, or the reason why Stone Barns is a transient organization, which it should be. It should be a place where people can come and learn and get experience. But it also, there's a bit of a patina that goes over the place that, it's very rose-colored lenses. And that was something that for a long time was tough for me to deal with, because we got, the work that we were doing and the long-term expectations of people coming into this work didn't always line up with what Stone Barns was portraying, or what they had, their expectations of what long-term goals some of their farmers and the people coming through the organization might have had.
Maybe just for a moment here, can you just break down what is the Stone Barns model for people who aren't familiar?
Sure. So the Stone Barns Center was started by David Rockefeller, who, God rest his soul, he passed away last year at the age of 101. His wife, Peggy, was very into agriculture. She started the American Farmland Trust. She was a high-end cattle breeder right there in Westchester County. And when she died in 1996, he wanted to do something in her memory, but also do something with these facilities that had fallen into disuse that the Rockefeller family owned, which was just a few miles down not even a few miles, a mile down the road from their family estate. And it was, excuse me, it was called the Stone Barns, was the original name of the facility, and it was a dairy facility that was built in the 30s to supply fresh food and produce for the family. And they basically had a company town up there in Peconico Hills. They had something like 1,000 employees that all lived in that area, so they wanted to have fresh milk and fresh produce, and so they built a working dairy. Well, when the Rockefellers build a working dairy, they don't just build a working dairy. They import Italian stonemasons and Italian stone and like build a castle. It's literally like Hogwarts for farming. It's an astoundingly beautiful facility. The landscape is really amazing, and it was all part of an original 4,000 acre, if I remember correctly, family preserve that was filled with carriage trails, and it's now a state park preserve. So Mr. Rockefeller decided that he was going to create a working farm, an educational center, and a restaurant to showcase the production of that farm all in this facility. So he spent a significant amount of money refurbishing it. He put in a world-class kitchen. He turned the dairy barn into the dining room of the restaurant. He found Dan Barber to be his signature chef. He found 2 farmers to be his lead farmers, Craig and a gentleman named Jack Algier. And then they were working under the Stone Barn Center, which is a nonprofit organization. So Mr. Rockefeller refurbished the facility, donated the facility and a certain endowment to the nonprofit Stone Barn Center. And then the Stone Barn Center rents its space to Blue Hill at Stone Barns. It's a little complicated, but bear with me. So Dan's restaurant rents its space from the nonprofit, which helps support the nonprofit, and then Dan's restaurant buys a significant amount of the production from the farm as well. Also buys from a large number of producers all over the Northeast and actually all over the United States at this point, depending on the products. So the Stone Barns' goal, and I don't know what their actual motto is at this point, I've been gone for a little while, but is to educate the farm about where food comes from, how it's raised, and how it impacts society. So they have farming classes, cooking classes, a farm store. They were doing at one point a summer farm camp, which they're not doing anymore as far as I know. High school kids would come for like internships. We did apprenticeships like you went through for people who wanted to learn farming skills, all under the guise of giving people access to farming in a way they might not otherwise have in a more urban environment like Westchester County, New York, that area. So it attracts a lot of really idealistic, really passionate, really driven people who believe very strongly in the mission. And it has a pretty wide reach at this point, and is fairly well known, I would say mostly because of Dan's fame, reflecting on the Stone Barn Center, because a lot more people know about Dan Barber and Blue Hill and his work, his books, than maybe they do about the Stone Barn Center itself. But the Stone Barn Center and the land and the organization is what allowed Dan to springboard to the level where he's at today, in my opinion. Also his talent and his drive and his incredible mad genius brain. Yeah. But he had this facility which gave him access to farmers ready to custom grow for him, work closely with him, and it's been a really symbiotic relationship in a lot of ways. It's driven a lot of interesting conversations and produced a lot of really good farmers too, and chefs, a lot of really great chefs as well.
So there's a lot of young people, idealistic young people going through there, a lot of apprentices, a whole, we probably had, 10 or 12 apprentices across the whole farm, if I remember correctly, something like that. Apprentices in the compost area, apprentices in the vegetable field, apprentices in the greenhouse, apprentices growing herbs, apprentices in the livestock department, flowers, and then you got interns, which are a whole nother kind of scale of people, and then you have just massive amounts of like school kids coming through. Then you got the volunteers, and then you got the school kids in the workshops and the camps, like you're talking about. It's an interesting example of, here we are trying to have a production livestock operation, in our case on the livestock crew, and doing real farming. But every step of the way, we are interacting with the public also. As butchers and in the meat world, this is something that we're always having to navigate through, is what do we allow the public to see and what do we not allow the public to see? And I remember, I can think of a lot of examples where I was maybe digging a trench for broken pipes in the field, in the pasture, working on irrigation, and there's like a group of 10 people watching me do that, taking pictures, or just like the hay is a little bit moldy and now it's like all in my eyes, and there's like a group of 10 people watching me, and I'm saying like something like where I'm just like, so that was continually happening at at Stone Barns?
At its heart, I think, is probably the biggest advantage and also maybe the biggest flaw of Stone Barns is that it is an opportunity to really have honest discussions about every aspect of agriculture, including the slaughter process, the future of young farmers, how to write a business plan. But the downside to it is that Stone Barns as an organization really has to protect its brand and its appearance. So there's always a fine line between what's too much and what's not enough. So that was something that I always really struggled with because I'm a very put it out there, put it up front kind of guy. And there were circumstances where that was not always ideal, and maybe the political aspect of it came into play a little more than I was comfortable with. And I think, politics plays a big part in all human relations, but especially in a forward-facing public organization doing potentially, what's the word I'm looking for, controversial work. Because there's always vegans walking around on the farm. There's always people, we'd be herding turkeys in and out of the barn a week before Thanksgiving, and people would stop us and, well, what are these turkeys for? What are you going to do with all these turkeys? And it's, just simple questions like that it's a great opportunity to interact with the public and help educate them, but also to do it without being shocking or what some people might find offensive. There was days where I would have to come off the slaughter floor covered in blood to go to a meeting or something. It was like, do I take the back way or do I just walk down the road to the office? Those things it was always a little bit of a fine line. And then I remember at the time when you and I were there, and it even kept going for a few years, actually right up until just about when I left, but we were really getting pushed to produce a lot of product. So we were raising a lot of animals on we were raising all of those animals on less than 25 acres of pasture. So it was really an intense production level environment that was constantly butting up against, well, why don't you guys do this cool little project over here that, maybe us in the actual production side of it, we're like, well, because we know it's not going to work. We don't understand what the end goal is, and we don't have time because we're already doing these other 3 weird projects that you have us doing, or, we're already raising this many animals and we have this high level of a workload. So it was always a little bit of a give and take between what we could do, what we wanted to do, and what we should have been doing. And then I also know that there was some ideological differences in the upper executive team level about the way the organization should have gone and is going. And I think that always added a certain amount of low-level stress to all of us because none of us really knew what our futures would hold. So, it was like, okay, well, what's the long-term goal for us in the livestock department at Stone Barns? What are we trying to accomplish? How much control do we have over that versus how much is mandated by what the restaurant wants or the executive crew wants or, that sort of thing. So it was always a little more complicated than just farming. It was actually a lot more complicated than just farming because of all those reasons. So it was a really interesting place to work. I really loved my time there, and it changed my life completely. But there were always some warning signs to me that was not a long-term solution. Partly because the pay was not that great. Partly because there was just nowhere to go above me. The people that had started the organization were pretty well entrenched and weren't really planning on going anywhere. And I kind of knew that there was not really much of an opportunity for me to grow into the level of responsibility and honestly ambition that I had. And I was probably there 18 months to 2 years too long when it comes right down to it. I should have been looking at what I wanted to do after that a little bit sooner, but que sera, sera, life is life. So things are different there now. All of us, Dan is gone, Craig is gone, I'm now gone. It's run by a different person who is from a vegetable background. They've changed a lot of what they're doing as far as public facing work. They're not doing farm camps anymore. They're gearing a little bit more towards quote unquote influencers and high end, I would say more elite people that they want to access and have influence on, policy kind of work and that sort of thing. So I just started looking, about a year and a half before I left. I realized that I probably wasn't going to be there forever, and that if I was going to figure something else out, that I needed to get on it and start deciding what I wanted to do. And I think a big part of that for me was just living in Westchester County. which nothing against Westchester County in New York, but it's just very suburban and crowded and not really my comfort zone. So I knew that eventually I was going to end up going back to Wyoming. So I just started looking at other opportunities, and I spent, some time building a business plan and just looking at different options. And that all kind of led me to raising some money and working towards buying the business that I currently have. And I left Stone Barns in the summer. It'll be 2 years ago this summer. I look back on my time there super fondly. I have made some really amazing friends and relationships, and I got a ton of experience. I mean, where else could someone go and just suddenly be responsible for raising 7 or 8 different kinds of animals in one setting in a unique situation like that, while also being supported by Stone Barns in a way to do career development, education. They really were supportive of us gaining as much knowledge and information as we could get while we were there. They weren't very supportive of us making long-term plans about staying there. And probably for good reason. There's only a few paid positions in that organization that are meant to be long-term, and the people that are in those positions are going to fight very hard to and protect what they have. So it's just natural human course of evolution, I suppose. So, and I know I'm a pretty ambitious person, and I also know that I've always wanted to work for myself. I really struggle to take direction from other people. Not so much from Craig, because Craig actually knew what he was talking about inside and out. But after Craig left, it became harder to follow the lead of an organization that had pushed out all the people with livestock experience and were making choices and decisions that weren't necessarily what I saw as in the best interest of the animals, the farmers, or the organization. Mm-hmm. And, going up against people who'd been there from the beginning, it was a losing battle. Yeah. And I didn't even want it to be a battle in the first place. And the time came, a few things happened that we don't really need to go into, but I realized in a flash that my time there was done, and that was that. So they had somebody to transition. I was the last of the old guard. Everybody else had been gone at that point. I was kind of running things on my own for all intents and purposes for about 4 months. And I just realized one day that there was not a long-term solution there for me, and that by sticking around, I was only closing myself off to opportunities or chances that I had to take to fulfill what I wanted to do. So I'm the classic throw everything to the wind and force myself to make something happen out of nothing, and that's kind of what I did.
So you're describing the Stone Barn Center has a unique financial structure and unique pressures, partly because of a kind of heavy bureaucracy that's involved with the major overarching management and decision making for the whole farm, and because it's a nonprofit, it has kind of unique financial structure and has a unique give and take with the restaurant that's on the premises.
It's just it's very complicated, and sometimes it's unnecessarily complicated from the point of view of the person who's doing the ground level work. But from the point of view of the organization, I can see why they made some of the decisions that they did. For example, I got in trouble because we were asked year over year to raise geese for the restaurant because Dan was working on his non-force-fed foie gras experiment, which I totally supported, had a lot of respect for, but after a year or two of doing it on the ground and being the person raising those geese and failing over and over and over again because we just simply weren't in the position or had the landscape or the means to accomplish what only one other person in the world had accomplished, that, being asked to continuously do something and knowing that we were going to fail at it simply because it was a story that needed to be told on the part of both the restaurant and the organization, that it was things like that were a tough pill to swallow. But I get it because it was in Dan's book, and it really is indicative of what he's trying to do. And also, in Dan's defense, even when it didn't work, they made the most ridiculous goose egg pasta I've ever tasted in my life, and they took the actual goose carcasses and used every piece of them and made some really incredible food out of it. But it was just hard to be put in a position of telling a story that we knew wasn't true and then having to do the work every day to fail in the end. Mm-hmm. It was things like that where the politics and the story of the organization chafed me the wrong way. And that's just me personally, because I'm not much for the bullshit. Like, I want to get down to the work, and I want to know the truth of things. So there were just little things like that all come part and parcel with a big public, well-known nonprofit organization that also has to raise funds and raise money to survive and maintain a good relationship with the most famous person involved, who owns the restaurant, which is the driving force of the entire organization. So I probably was a square peg in a round hole in that way. I'm not the most diplomatic person in the world, so there's some times where my mouth probably got me in trouble, but in the end, I think they're all doing really good work there. I have a ton of respect for Dan and his organization and what he does. He was nothing but ever supportive of me. I mean, he loaned me money personally to buy sheep equipment to raise my own sheep on the side, which I then sold to him in his restaurant. And I have nothing but the highest praise for Dan Barber and Blue Hill. I have a lot of respect for the Stone Barns organization. I just know that I am not built to work inside of it. And also there is maybe, in my opinion, a little bit too much idealism and fantasy wrapped up in work that is, at its heart, has nothing to do with idealism or fantasy and has everything to do with reality and the truth on the ground. Mm-hmm. And just seeing all of the apprentices that were, coming through the system and being told, oh, your career in farming and, all these, this is what you can do, and here's all this experience, and then watching over and over and over and over and over again, watching these apprentices go out into the real world and fail or struggle so hard because what they were taught and the way they were taught it at Stone Barns put a rosy glow on it, that the minute you step outside of that nonprofit organization that's not beholden to a true bottom line, it just instantly vaporizes, and you're in the real world where farming is a low-income, high-work scenario that is, you need to be built for that. And there were a lot of people who came through who thought they may be built for it and were told they were built for it and built up to feel like they were built for it, and in the end were not. And there were a lot of things I think Stone Barns could have done to support those apprentices that they chose not to do. Like, the brand Stone Barns could have been used to help those apprentices market and sell their products. There could have been a bigger support network. But it's all neither here nor there. In the end, like, I got what I needed out of it. They gave me an opportunity. Like, I was in the New York Times. I had a half-page color article in the New York Times about my work with sheep, and where would I have ever been given that opportunity anywhere in the world? So I don't want to sound, bitter or like I don't have a lot of love and respect for the organization, because I do. It's just, I told myself that I fit there better than I actually did. So, but, like I said, que sera, sera. In the end, all of the people who are no longer at Stone Barns are doing really well. The people who are at Stone Barns are getting opportunities that they wouldn't have gotten before, with all of us still there over a long period of time. So, the world moves on and everybody moves forward, and they're still teaching people good skills and trying to do good work. It's just, everybody's going to do it in their own way. Yeah.
So let's move on to Jackson Hole Buffalo Meat Company. But before we do, I want to make one point about when you came to Stone Barns. Yeah, me and Dan, the other apprentices, we were working full-time livestock, and shortly after that, you came on board full-time livestock, and you and Dan were also going into the restaurant and working at the restaurant for an evening shift after our day shift on the farm was over. I just want to make that point that you, if anybody is doubting it, Chris is an incredibly hardworking individual. And one more thing I'd like to say about that is the way that you moved out to New York and put yourself on that farm, even though you had no position available to you at the outset. This is a lesson that I think is just a wonderful life lesson I've learned from some other folks, that if you want to make something happen, that's how you do it, is you show up. And in the fishing industry, when I had a stint, in Maine doing lobstering, these Australian fishermen young guys my same age. We were in our 20s, and these guys had done some fishing in Australia, right? And then there's lobster there, so they're familiar with lobster fishing. And they just basically went on a world tour, and they would show up on the dock in these foreign countries. Like here they are. They show up in coastal Maine. They don't know anybody, and they show up on the dock early in the morning, and they say to the fishermen as they're baiting up, they say, "Take me out. I will do a good job for you. I'm here. Your guy's sick today.
Yep.
Take me out." And that's exactly what you did. And it doesn't work always right away. It might take a couple weeks of that. But then when you're fucking there, someone's going to take you out. And then you can just, show them. You can prove eventually. You just prove that, you got what it takes. And I was so impressed with these Australian guys my age who just showed up. And they stood on the dock, and they're like, "Take me out." And that's exactly what you did at Stone Barns.
I got to give a lot of credit to, none of that would have been possible if there weren't people in my life who saw something and were like, okay, I'm going to give this person a chance, whether it was Emma Hurst at Sorella, the restaurant I worked at, who gave me a job working in her kitchen, or Craig Haney, who, again, he did not have to give me even the time of day, and yet he opened his operation and his time and his heart to me, and that made everything that I did after that possible. Like he did everything he could to find a place for me on that farm, knowing that I was as dedicated and as passionate about it as I was. And it's really about the people that you meet along the way too, because it's really easy to just throw caution to the wind and just have nothing to lose, but if you can't get that to resonate with the people that you're trying to work with or around you, then it doesn't do you much good. But I just feel really lucky that I happened to meet Craig at that time and place, and he gave me a shot, which then led to everything else that I've done since then. So just, again, I can't overstate how grateful I am to Craig for everything that happened for me.
Yeah, I'm hoping to have Craig to have him on this podcast a little bit and
that would be awesome.
Mine some of his wisdom, because he's the real deal. Right. He's got the wisdom. Okay, so you're working on your exit strategy. How do you raise the money to buy Jackson Hole Buffalo Meat Company?
Well, first I had to find out if it was for sale, which I kind of thought it was, because it's like I said, it's been around for 70 years. And the gentleman who owned it previous to me had it for about, I think, 18 or 19. And I just kind of got the feeling that he was probably hitting that point in his life where he was, he's almost 60 now. So, and I had a really good friend who had worked for him for a long time. So I reached out to her and just asked her what she knew about it and if he'd be interested. And so she was like, well, I don't know, I'll call him and I'll find out. So she called him and he emailed me 2 days later and he said, I'm always open to talking about selling my business, and this is the price, and this is what, you'd get with it, and this, that, and the other. And so I took that, and I started just writing a business plan for myself, which was an adventure. I'd kind of written one for the restaurant before that, but that was a lot less formal. This was, I really wanted to do it legitimately because I knew I was going to have to be raising money. So I started writing out a business plan, and I just kind of opened myself up to the universe. And so in talking to financiers, and I went to the SBA, the Small Business Administration, I went to a couple different banks, and what kept happening is everyone kept looking at my business plan saying, well, this one, it's a great business, it's super well established. 2, you're the perfect person for it. 3, we see the potential, this could be really great, but sorry, the problem here is you. And I kept being like, well, how's the problem me? And one of the guys from the SBA put it very succinctly to me. He's like, look, I'm going to tell you straight up. He's like, you have used car credit. He's like, you have good credit, but you have used car credit. He's like, I could give you $10,000 right now. He's like, but you don't have $1 million credit. He's like, there's just no way for any financial institution to just loan you on your own this much money. And he said, what you need to do is you need to go out and you need to raise some seed capital for a down payment, and you need to find someone to co-sign on your loan. And I was like, well, great. Who's going to do that? So I went to some friends and family and a former employer, just people that I knew in my life who all were like, oh, this is great. Like, this is a great idea. Here's a little bit of cash. So I ended up raising about $200,000 just through, my mom gave me a loan, and Jenny Lyons, a mutual friend of ours who we both lived with at one point in New York, she actually invested with the business. So she's a part owner. A friend from Blue Hill and her husband, they invested some money. And then, so I raised about $200,000, which was enough of a down payment, but it still wasn't enough to actually get the deal done because of my personal level of credit. There's just a certain level of guarantee that they were needing that I couldn't give them. So I sort of hit a bit of a stall, and the issue was finding someone basically to underwrite my loan. And I have a friend who was actually a volunteer at Stone Barns for a long time. Her name is Allison Forsman. And she's just a very entrepreneurial, very driven, like ultra smart. We hit it off immediately. She was always quizzing me about like what I was going to do next, what my plans were. You know, she saw my sort of entrepreneurial drive and kind of wanted to facilitate that. So we just became really good friends. So she introduced me to her husband, Stefan, who works in finance in New York City. And they just became big champions of mine. And they were introducing me to people who they thought might want to invest or co-sign. And, you know, we went around and around for a couple of months the summer before I left. And then we just, one day, we were sitting and having beers at Stefan and Allison's house and just having a really deep conversation. And there's something clicked. And the next day, Stefan called me and he was like, you know what? I realized that the secret here is for me to co-sign on this loan for you. And I was like, what? Thank you. Like, what? Okay, this is awesome. What do you need out of it? So he gets 10% of my business in return for co-signing. So basically, he's the last resort. If I screw up, if everything goes to shit, he's the one that has to step in and make the payments. But he knows that the business is strong enough, he trusts enough in me, so he was willing to put his name on the line in return for a small percentage of the business in order to get me into it, which I am eternally grateful. That was the thing that was the final click. Wasn't the final thing for me to leave Stone Barns, but it was the thing that allowed me to leave Stone Barns at that time when I needed to. And when I did that, when I went to the bank and said, okay, I found my cosigner, they looked at his documents and they were like, done. It's a done deal. I found a local bank here in Jackson Hole through another one of my investors who has been really great to me. And once I put all the pieces in place, and basically it's just a matter of playing the game. Like, I understand what the bank needs. I know what they're looking for. And you just have to find a way to facilitate for that for them in a way that allows them to help you. So it really was like a give and take. And, you know, they were like, very simply, like, this is what we need. We need this much down payment. We need this kind of a business plan. We need a person to underwrite and be your lender of last resort. And I found those three things. Once I did that, they were like, boom, deal done. So I left Stone Barns that August, which will be 2 years ago this August, got to Jackson, you know, theoretically, not literally cash in hand, but like figuratively cash in hand. Met with the owner of the business, and he was like, well, you know, there's a few other people that are interested. And then it became a whole new ball game of negotiating, arriving at price. You know, I worked in the store for him for 6 months, sort of technically undercover, getting to know the staff and the operations. And, you know, in all fairness to him, my business is very cyclical and very seasonal. So we do a significant portion of our yearly revenue at Christmas time, like basically from December 1st to Christmas Day is 35% of our yearly revenue. So I understood why he didn't want to sell it in August so that I could take over and then make all the money from Christmas, you know, that he'd set up for the rest of the year. So we agreed to sell on January 1st. It ended up we closed on March 1st because everything in that realm always takes longer than you think. But I got it at a good price. He got a nice, huge, giant check for me to retire on, and the staff is really excited. I have an amazing crew of people that work for me. I have people that have been there for literally 20 years that are still, you know, excited and want to be there and are passionate about what we're doing. It's a small scale business. There's only 5 of us on full-time staff. But it's been really amazing. Like, I'm my own boss now. I get to make the calls. Like, you know, I deal with the stress and the uncertainties of all of that, and learning all sorts of things about cash flow, and, you know, just it's every day is a new adventure. But I'm now the captain of my own ship. I have a crew of people excited about what we're doing and where we're going, and I think that my business, as successful as it is up until this point, and as long-standing and as stable as it is, there's so much room for growth that it like boggles my mind sometimes. So I'm trying to just stay focused on the day-to-day and getting to know the ins and outs of the business and keeping the paychecks coming in and, you know, keep the bills paid, but also thinking about aesthetics and rebranding and growth and what sales avenues I can get into and what I want to do to take this business to the next level because all of the previous owners, there's been 4 previous owners to me that all each did something a little bit different that grew the business sort of in an exponential way. So it started in 1947 as a cold storage and game processing facility in Jackson Hole. And this was before in-house refrigeration was widespread, especially when Jackson was it's still a remote place, but at that time it was really remote. So people had meat lockers. So you would go and, if you went out and shot an elk or a buffalo or a deer or your own cow or, you had lambs or whatever, you would go, you'd have them killed, and then you would take them there and they would hang them, and then they would also cut and wrap for people, just as a service, like not a butcher shop per se, but like more like a custom cutting sort of scenario.
Sure.
So that's how it started in 1947, and they did that for quite a while. And then I think maybe the second owner decided that they would start making like buffalo sausages and salamis and like little gift packs, because tourism was becoming such a big part of life in Jackson Hole. So people would come to Jackson looking to eat buffalo, looking to eat elk. So they started making these little like gift packages, sort of like Hickory Farms kind of style stuff. And then the next owner decided that, well, if we're doing this already, well, why aren't we mail ordering these all over the country? So they started a mail order business, and it was all over the phone or mail, and they would ship these boxes all over the country. So that took the business to another step up. Well, the owner before me, he came during the internet boom. So in 1996, when he bought it, he started immediately working on putting it on the internet, and he put it on the internet in like 2001, I think, which just exploded the business completely, because now we ship all over the United States all day, every day, via our website and the internet. So he took it to another level by putting it online. And now I need to take it to another level through some of the ideas that I have about growth for the business and what my next steps are. And just looking at, getting to know the game meat business, the buffalo and elk industry, seeing how that's different from your normal, I don't want to say commodity, but your normal run-of-the-mill livestock operations. Yeah. The regulations that go along with it, the supply lines, the business models, it's all very similar, but it's also very different from the cattle industry, the lamb industry, that sort of thing. So it's just learning the ins and outs of it and where my opportunities for growth are, and what I can do also to modernize my operation, because, we are a state certified game processing facility. So I can bring in skinned and quartered animals, but I don't have a rail system. I don't have any way to hang anything. We do all of our cutting and processing in the same space as we do all of our packaging and shipping. We don't do a lot of actual cutting, simply because it's really difficult for us to get whole carcasses in, because the game meat industry doesn't really work in that way. There's only a few main specific game meat processing facilities. There's one in South Dakota, one in Colorado, and one in Nevada. They're the 3 like regional main players, and each one of those guys has their own sort of business model for what they do, but they're also the process slaughter and processing facilities for everyone in their region, whether it's the upper, Great Plains, Midwest, whether it's like Denver, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, or farther west in sort of Nevada, Idaho, Oregon sort of scenario. So,
and these would be
we buy in a lot of.
These would be federally inspected game processing. So they can ship across state lines. Those plants.
Yes, but see, this is where things get complicated, and this is where the brain starts to twist when it comes to what I'm doing, because buffalo, elk, wild boar, pheasant, deer, they're all farm raised. They're all what are called non-amenable species, so they are not beholden to USDA slaughter regulations in the same way that beef, lamb, pork are. So it's a bit of a loophole, but it's not necessarily a beneficial loophole in a lot of ways. So if I had a state certified processing facility in Wyoming that I could theoretically raise my own buffalo, take them to the state certified facility, have them killed under state inspection, I can still ship those across state lines. Yeah. But not very many state certified facilities are built to handle buffalo. So what ends up happening is, so, for example, there's a ranch that's an hour away from me called the CL Bar Ranch, and it's 8,000 acres. They have about 400 animals, and they ship off about 100 animals a year. And they ship them, they load them up in November. The processing plant in Denver sends trucks up and picks up those animals on the hoof, pays for the trucking, trucks them back down to Denver, where they're processed in the country's largest bison processing facility, which, keep in mind, processes 100 carcasses a day, which is literally nothing. Like a drop in the bucket compared to every other industry. They process them. Their main business is 1 pound fresh burgers or fresh burger packages that they sell to like Kroger, Costco, Whole Foods. So their main business is grinding. They don't do any custom like weighted steak cuts or anything like that. So from them, I buy like shoulder clods, trim, all the stuff I use to make jerky sticks, grind our fresh burgers, make salamis. Then I buy it from them. They put it on a pallet, put it in a refrigerated truck, and truck it 10 hours back up to me in Idaho. And then I have to drive 2 hours from Jackson Hole to Idaho to pick it up because the trucks won't drive into Jackson Hole. Mm-hmm. So I bought from them. I'm buying like trim, anything that's grindable that I use for my value added products. When it comes to like steaks, roasts, things like that, I buy them from South Dakota from the place in Spearfish, if I remember correctly. But they're doing custom cut steaks, so I can buy case steaks from them. So I can buy, perfectly cut T-bones, fillets, all that stuff. And it makes more sense for me to buy them that way because they have a guy who's been doing it for 25 years who probably makes like $14 to pay somebody with very little experience, probably $20 an hour in Jackson Hole to cut and wrap. And I don't really have the facility for it. So it's not like whole animal butchery is not really part of our business model right now, but it's going to have to be over the long term because the industry is changing. So there's a lot of there's not enough buffalo to go around. Mm-hmm. There's only 450,000 approximately buffalo in all of North America, and that includes the wild herds. There's not that many wild herds, but so to keep that in context, we slaughter in the United States 120,000 cows a day. So if we slaughtered bison at the same rate we slaughtered cows, they'd be gone literally in 3 days.
Yeah.
So, but the demand for bison is growing so exponentially because people are becoming aware of the health benefits of it. Companies like Epic Bar have exploded. And I hate to say this, but like goddamn dog food companies are moving in. It's becoming, there's a pinch on the supply. So the big players in the industry are sort of consolidating, and it's going to change the products that I have available to me and how I do business. So my long-term goal is to get away from, relabeling and buying in case steaks and that sort of thing. And eventually, and I should have prefaced this from the very beginning, the whole reason I bought this business is so I can raise buffalo. Like literally, that's why I did it. There's no way I could have gone out and bought a ranch and started a ranch from the ground up in a way that would have been economically feasible for me in anything resembling the short term.
Yeah.
So what I decided I would do is find a business that was directly related to the buffalo industry that already made money. I was very lucky in doing that. So I bought this business in order to leverage this business into land so that we can start producing our own animals, not only to cushion us in the supply realm, but also because it adds a level of authenticity that I think we could really benefit from, because some of our main competitors, and I use the word competitor loosely because, there's so much business to go around that we're not really competing. But some of our main competitors are places like Wild Idea Bison or North Star Bison, where they're ranch-based. Like they started as a ranch, then they started direct marketing to their own customers, and that gives them a level of authenticity and control over the supply line that I don't currently have. So if I have people that call me and say, I want all grass-fed buffalo, I can't guarantee them 99% of the time that it's going to be all grass-fed buffalo, because only 5% of the buffalo that are produced in the United States are 100% grass-fed. Mm-hmm. 95% of them are finished and grained in some way. Mm-hmm. And this is where you start pulling the thread of like idealism and what should or shouldn't be happening. And I think you know this as well as I do. Everything that you deal with when it comes to livestock and agriculture is always more complicated than it seems on the surface. Mm-hmm. So when I have people that call me and say, like, I need 100% grass-fed buffalo, I send them to those businesses because I can't provide them with what they need, and I don't want them to not get what they need simply because I'm being competitive or whatever. There's more than enough business to go around, so I'll send them to them. But when people walk into my store in Jackson Hole and they say, are these the buffalo or elk from I saw out there running around by the Tetons? It's like, no. And then they ask me, well, where do your buffalo come from? And I tell them the truth, and I say it comes from all over the western United States. I buy from all the major producers that I can get access to, which in turn supports all the small family ranches that are producing and selling to those facilities, which is great. But I'd also love to be able to say that, and we also have bison from our own ranch an hour away that we produce, that we market directly in certain channels. simply so that, one, I can go back to raising livestock, which is what I really love and I'm really good at. Two, it adds a layer of authenticity to my business, that I have a really strong brand, a really strong history, and a really good business model, but it would make me feel even better, and I think it would put us even more neck and neck with our quote-unquote competitors to be able to say that we have some control over our production line. And then there's also, to be totally honest, there's some like agro-tourism aspects to it that could be pretty lucrative too, that could allow me to subsidize the production till I get to a point where I'm actually making money raising livestock, which is a really difficult thing to do. It's the margins in meat business are not big. So to try and take this big chance and get land and produce animals strictly for a production model is great, but I'd be a lot happier if I could have that production model, but also have hay rides and buffalo burgers on the ranch for all the tourists that are driving by every day going to Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park, that would then subsidize my ability to buy fencing and more animals and run it the way I really like to run it. Yeah. So I'm just trying to think outside the box of different ways to, and that's something I learned, honestly, bringing it back to Stone Barns a little bit, is so much of what we did at Stone Barns was sort of a carnival like show atmosphere, you know, like Harvest Fest and hay rides and farm tours. And, you know, it's easy to look down on those things and be like, oh, this is corny or whatever, but it's really not. It's actually, in the modern day, probably the most effective way to make money in farming. Yeah. If you have the right scenario. It's really hard to raise a bunch of pigs and make a living just raising pigs. Now, if you had pigs and, like, you know, tours, or there's just, it's, if you want to be a small scale farmer and be sustainable and live your ideals out, you have to think outside the box and find other ways to make money. It's as simple as that. Yeah. And that's probably part of what I was frustrated with at Stone Barns, is it was always about, oh, you'll be fine, go out and just start a farm and you'll make a living. And it's not the case. You really got to get creative and really be driven and ambitious to make it work.
Getting into, trying to use every tool at your fingertips. I've heard of certain really large ranch acreages in the Southwest that end up bringing in a lot of money through marketing to the birding community and marketing, you know, their land as bird refuge, and then charging admission to the birding community and actually having that be a very lucrative part of their operation, and then also places that advertise their land to the hunting community, right, where it's you are raising cattle and you are raising animals and you are doing agriculture, but you're also bringing in income making a living, making it economically viable, which I think that your longer stint at Stone Barns, you got to, like you said, you got to see a lot of a much deeper look at what does economic viability mean and where does it actually happen or where it doesn't happen. Well, I think that's the perfect conversation that needs to continue to happen in agriculture if we want more young farmers. Is how do we, you know, how do these guys actually make money? So one of the things you're saying is, in your region, one of the bottlenecks, not only the supply and the sheer, the sheer small number of bison that exist, but one of the bottlenecks is the processing facilities in your region, and you have to go outside of state and buy from the existing processing facilities in other states. So you're entertaining some maybe short-term or long-term possibilities of creating a processing facility in your region, and thereby being able to actually to not have to ship live animals out of state and process them elsewhere, to kind of keep the loop closer to home, incorporate that into your business model somehow.
Well, so the ideal and my perfect scenario is the Wild Idea Bison, which is a ranch out in North Dakota. They field harvest under inspection. So they literally drive, and I know you're familiar with this, so they literally drive their semi-trailer processing facility into the field and shoot the bison in the field, process them right there, and then take them back to a further processing facility and are allowed to then sell them on in whatever way they feel comfortable with. They're in North Dakota, so the state of North Dakota has totally okayed that. They've been doing it for a couple years now. It works really well. State of Wyoming is a little bit different. Wyoming, I like to call it the land of willful ignorance. If there's a way that things have always been done, it's really hard to get the culture and the community in Wyoming to change that. It's a very heavily cattle state as it is, so there's always a little bit of suspicion looked at for the buffalo industry. But what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to work, so just to give you an example, up until last year, there were no USDA slaughter facilities in Wyoming, anywhere. 2 of them have now opened up. One only does beef. They don't have any facilities for buffalo. The other one is right in Jackson Hole. They just got USDA inspection, but they are only processing for their ranch exclusively. So that processing facility also used to do all the 4-H kids around, like all the people who raise a few cows in their backyard or lambs or pigs. So that facility is now no longer available to the public. So there's me, who's trying to buy as locally as possible. There's this ranch in Pinedale, which is an hour away, that I mentioned, the CL Bar. Their owners are really trying to keep it as local as they can. They're tired of trucking their animals 10 hours each way. There's a lot of small-scale producers in the area. Central Wyoming College, I've had some discussions with. They have a meat fabrication court. I don't know if it'd be a certificate or what it would be, but they don't have a facility to use. So there's and I think this probably holds true all over the United States, because we ran into some of the same issues at stone barns, like trying to find time in slaughter facilities and driving 5 or 8 hours each way. So what I'm working on right now is trying to find a way to set up a slaughter facility somewhere nearby, ideally on that buffalo ranch, that would then be, whether it's under USDA voluntary inspection or USDA inspection, but something that would almost be under a cooperative style model where 4-H kids could have their animals processed there. I could have buffalo processed there. People could bring their beef in. Just sort of like an all-purpose, multi-use, cooperative style organization that has a legit facility to operate out of and someone who is legitimate as a meat cutter to run it. And we have the meat cutter who's USDA trained. We have the land to do it on. I think we have the financial backing to do it. Now it's just a matter of dealing with the bureaucracy and getting what we want out of it. So this is all stuff that's come up in the last 6 months. So I'm trying to run my business and try to further this cause a little bit, because about a month and a half ago, we went out and we field harvested a buffalo for our own freezer meat, because they had a bull who kept jumping the fencing and getting in with the females at the wrong time of year. So they wanted to cull him out. So we went down there and got on the back of a flatbed pickup with the ranch manager, drove out into the middle of the herd, literally, scratching their heads. Is unbelievable. And then shot this buffalo from less than 15 yards away. And it was an epiphany. I've never seen an animal go down so quickly and quietly and cleanly in a natural setting like that. It was unlike any other slaughter or processing operation I've ever been a part of. And it made me realize that for buffalo specifically, if this is what I want to do, and I want to have my own ranch or work with ranchers, and we want to streamline and vertically integrate this supply line, that is the ideal way to do it. Because we don't have to put them on trucks. They never know what's coming. There's so much less transportation and fossil fuel burning. There's so much more control over what happens. But to get the federal or state bureaucracy to allow us to do that is a high hurdle to jump. So I have a friend who does HACCP and slaughterhouse and boutique food safety planning. Her name is Michelle Fansteel. She works with Dirigo Food Safety out of Maine, and she's phenomenal. So she has been working with me and sort of probing and gathering some intelligence on what we can and can't do. And so she called the state of Wyoming and inquired about us doing state inspected field harvest. Excuse me. And they just shot it down immediately. They don't have the budget for it. They don't have anybody trained for it. They just don't want to change their ways. So we're looking at different opportunities, seeing if there's ways we can sort of muscle them into having to do it. We're just kind of looking at all the options, because I just think that having a small-scale meat plant that could fulfill a lot of different needs in this remote location where we don't really have any options could go a long way to creating a stronger local food shed and a stronger local economy for all intents and purposes. So if I could buy 100 animals a year from this ranch and have them processed on a seasonal schedule and have a supply line that's in a supply chain that's set up that way, I mean, everybody wins in that scenario. The ranch wins, I win, the buffalo win, like the customer wins, because I have a little bit more control over the quality of the product that's coming through. But it's a big undertaking. So one step at a time, trying to just figure out what the really what it's going to come down to is looking at other examples of people who are doing this. Kind of like, I know you have had some discussions with some people in the past, and then who you work with have sort of set this up. So it's really just a matter of finding examples of where other people have done this and then translating it into what we need and showing the state or the federal government how this could be easier than they think it is and the benefits that would be involved with it. Okay. So we'll see. It's just a matter of time and just continuous pressure and just pushing it forward and seeing where we can go with it. So
at this point, you got Dr. Michelle on your side. Is she a doctor?
Yep.
And
she is. She's amazing.
Yeah, and so you guys are currently working on the bureaucracy of it and how to write this up the right way, the correct way, how to show other successful models and bring that into the conversation to convince the state that this is legitimate.
Yeah, and part of it is that I'm right now I'm kind of in a little bit of a holding pattern because I also, I'm working with this ranch and I'm working on this plan, but I'm also working on getting access to my own land. And it's potentially could happen even as soon as this summer, which would be incredible. I don't know. I shouldn't say too much about it, but jinx myself. But if that were the case, then it would basically, I need some things to shake out before we decide like where we want to actually put that facility or how we want it to operate or what we want it to look like. There's a lot of people involved that all would need to have a say in it, and really it comes down to how do all those people have a say in an equitable manner in a way that we can actually accomplish things and get things done. So it's finding the cooperative structure or the means to facilitate the decision-making process and the reaching of the goals for everyone that's involved. It's going to need to be involved for it to succeed in the long term, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and I'm just trying to keep my business afloat at the same time. So it's like, I put as much time as I can into it when I can. But I need a few things to sort of shake out over the next probably 2 months before we can really start to dive into it and start moving forward. And there's no real rush at the moment just because there's no animals ready for production. There's no, there's a lot of things that are going to need to be figured out. But I really think if we could get this up and running and have basically a cooperative slaughterhouse with a community of membership of people who want to take advantage of it so that 4-H kids could get their steers slaughtered there. And I could raise turkeys on my buffalo ranch. I could raise bison and elk and, have a facility where all of those animals could be slaughtered depending on our needs and processed at any given time in a legit manner that works for everybody's business models that's involved. Yeah. So it's it's just a journey of 1,000 miles. But what I'm really grateful for is that my time at Stone Barns connected me to a lot of really intelligent people who are all working on these things too in different areas. But I think all of us can share information and really come to sort of central ground to facilitate and help each other out with all of our individual, obstacles in what we're trying to do.
Yeah. One of my goals for one of my interests in here, having you on the podcast and hearing you talk about this is to hopefully connect you with some of the meat block community with the possible end result of just broadening your network and maybe people who have some wisdom or have some experience with this stuff that they could come forward and help you. I know Travis and David both have a great deal of experience with this kind of legislation and HACCP and setting these things up at a managerial and owner-operator level, and I want them to hear where you're at with this. And I also know that a lot of the listening community in their regions around the United States or elsewhere, whether they're in the bison and elk niche or not, there's still a lot of parallels that I think a lot of regions experience with the bottleneck that is processing facilities. So I think it's very applicable. It's your journey with this is, I think, right there with not only journeys that other companies have made in the past, but also I think a lot of people are in their specific regions are right there with you in trying to manifest these kind of improvements in their local food shed. I work for a farmer-owned co-op model, and I want to bring some of the brains behind that. I want to provide a platform for them to be able to talk about what their journey has been like with the co-op model and with the farmer-owned processing facility model, to give people like you more information about that. I certainly don't have all the information myself because I'm sort of more of the boots on the ground person doing the cutting, etc. But there's some there are a lot of people behind the scenes who have manifested these things in the past that could have some insight for you. So hopefully that comes to be.
It's really interesting that you say that too, because even just in the last 6 months since this has sort of come to the forefront, as soon as I kind of opened myself up to the universe as to moving towards this goal, people started popping up in places that had, like you, Michelle. Then just the other day, I met a friend at the bar for a beer, and she was with the local, our region's USDA rural development officer, and I filled him in on what I was doing. And he was like, "Oh, really?" Because I worked with the USDA to set up a mobile slaughter facility in the Bering Strait on the islands up in Alaska, where they're under USDA jurisdiction, but if I remember correctly, there's no inspector on site. They've figured out a way, and they got an exemption of some sort to allow them to do the super remote mobile processing and still sell under USDA certification. And I'm thinking, and he was like, if we did it up there, you could make the same case down here, being as remote as you are. You're facing some of the same issues. He's like, the precedent is already there. And that's really what it comes down to, is there's always got to be somebody that breaks the ground. Mm-hmm. But once the ground is broken, then it's just that much, it's the pioneer species coming in. It's that much easier for everyone else to follow along. So if we could do it, then who else could do it all over the United States? Like, once we set the precedent and once we show that we can create niche boutique level meat safely and efficiently, more people are going to want to do it, and it's just going to increase the fabric of the food shed of the entire United States. So I just like to think I'm part of a small part of a bigger movement that's moving forward, of like-minded people who all want to see this same sort of end result, which is producing livestock and meat on a small scale economically at a really high level of quality and make a living doing it.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, Chris, any final thoughts? And also, I would like to ask you, where can people find you to ask you questions or anything you'd like to plug in addition to that?
Obviously, I'll plug my business, the Jackson Hole Buffalo Meat Company. It's www.jhbuffalomeat.com. You can reach us at store at 307-733-4159. Feel free to call and if you want to chat with me or have any questions. We have a lot more stuff available in our freezer cases in the store that we don't have online, just because it's hard to sell. It's hard to run a butcher shop online because you can't necessarily always sell weighted items effectively. So we have a lot of really interesting cuts like elk tri-tip and buffalo brisket and the sorts of things that you can't get very many other places. And then I'd just like to say thanks to all the people that helped me get to where I am. There's no way I could have gotten here if it wasn't for people who believed in me and put money on the table, you know. So, and I would also say that anybody who is interested in buffalo, really look into what it means to raise them, because everything that I thought I knew about what it takes to raise buffalo is wrong. Everything that I heard was, oh, they're so dangerous. The fencing is out of control. You know, they'll smash all your equipment. It's, you know, like all these horror stories that I heard that were barriers of entry to raising bison are wrong. They are unlike any other livestock I've ever worked for. I watched them lead those bison around like sheep with a bucket of pellets. They are super mellow if you take good care of them. The fencing has changed completely. There's just so many different options for raising buffalo that are available to people now that might not have been available before, and it's more economically viable than raising cattle. Not only that, they are native to this landscape. They were evolved and raised for thousands of years in North America. They were meant to be here. Mm-hmm. Nothing against cows. Cows are not meant to be here. So, you know, that's probably going to piss a lot of people off, but the more time I spend with buffalo and the more time I'm around them and the more I see the economics of the industry and the opportunity for growth and just the energy that those animals put off when you're around them and the changes that it has on the people that raise them, if you have any interest at all, look into it, because it's possible. It's way more possible than you would have thought of. And I think that the more buffalo that we have in North America, the better off we are. And
you're talking, just for clarification, you're talking broad acre, using the modern innovations in electric fencing to mob these animals and go paddock to paddock to paddock.
Yep. The gentleman I work with at the CL bar, his name is Terry. He was a cattleman here in Wyoming for 25 years, and he's been raising bison for, I think, the last 3 years on this ranch. And he straight up looked me in the face and said, I don't know why I ever raise cows. 40 below zero, he doesn't get out of bed. Freezing rain, he doesn't get out of bed. Like, they run them through the chute one time per year. That's the only time they get handled. Every animal spends less than 10 minutes in confinement in the chute, going through to get preg checked, vaccinated, all that stuff. They're so hands off. The fencing is, traditional buffalo ranches have 8-foot, post fencing with woven wire all the way around it. These guys are raising bison with 4-foot high recycled PVC T-posts that bend with electrical wire running through them, because they are actually, the fence post itself is an insulator that's 4 feet high. Those bison, if they wanted to, could just jump right over that fence, but they don't want to because they're well taken care of. Feed them right, water them right, treat them with respect. They don't want to go anywhere. So it's just, my mind has been blown as to what it means to actually raise buffalo logistically as a livestock producer on the ground versus what I thought that I knew. And so, and right now at the gate, if you take your animals to slaughterhouse, you're getting $4.75 per pound hanging weight. I think the average for cattle right now is like $1.50 or $1.75. So and there's things that come along with that. Like, it's a longer term raising the animal. Yields are a little bit different, but just, if you have any interest in it at all, dig into it. It's way more possible than I thought it was. And at one point there were 65 million bison in this country. They created the Great Plains. We're down to 450,000. At one point we were at less than 5,000 bison in the entire world. So anything we can do to bring this incredible species back to its native habitat, I'm all for it. And it tastes good.
Awesome. Chris, more power to you. I'm so glad for the conversation, the dialogue, and the stories. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm hoping to continue this conversation with you when you come out to visit, and you say May or some month this spring, right?
Sometime soon,
yeah. So, and then maybe we can sit down in person. We can talk to Travis more and all that. So, if any listeners end up having any lingering questions for Chris, send them in, and we'll make sure we cover that the next time we talk to Chris. Give me a call on there. Awesome. All right, Chris, thanks so much.
All right, thanks, bro. Have a great day.
All right. Bye.